Hello, everybody. We'll get started a few minutes after the hour. I posted a link to our agenda in the Zoom chat. We'll have a short update today about the new OSS CERT SIG, and then we'll dive into continual refining of our Finders CVD guide. So please mark your attendance, and if you have any additional opens, write those down for us. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Hey, Crow, where's my video? Yes, you, haha. I noticed this earlier in the education SIG, the best SIG. Your mic is going in and out a little bit today. It's not usually too bad, but once in a while it is a little more difficult to hear you. Oh, pulling out the professional.
We'll go for the other mic.
podcaster.
How's that?
That is loud but amazing.
All right, I'll turn it down a bit.
Do you have like a big switchboard thing going on over there?
I do. I don't know what that noise was. Can't see
You
my
can
little
make things up.
Can. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my other mic. I might have to tear this whole thing down and
Oh
see
dear.
what's what.
Okay, that is kind of amazing. Now I need a new toy.
Oh, it's great.
Oh dear.
All right, I posted a link to our agenda. We will get started in just 1 minute. Please mark your attendance, and if you have any opens you'd like to talk about. Yeah, the other mic is giving me a weird gating. So I'll have to figure that out.
Well, it'll probably give you the opportunity to add or replace other fine pieces of hardware in your setup.
So much hardware.
I'm so not surprised.
Well, when you don't do anything except make silly little videos for the internet, you accumulate a bunch of stuff to do those dumb little videos.
Yeah, a friend of mine recently got into making videos when COVID kicked in. They're big conference speakers, so now they have the best, most highly produced videos for conferences. And I did a talk with him for GDC, Games Developer Conference. Man, our video looks so sharp. It's got like custom backgrounds, and all sorts of great stuff.
I could pull out the green screen if you want. We can do something fancy.
Yeah, I've got mine in my closet right over here.
All right, friends, welcome to the July 13th edition of the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group, aka the best working group. We are going to start today. Do we have any new friends that are new to the group or have been gone for a while that wanted to say hello? All right. Can I possibly get a volunteer to help us take notes and scribe today? As I discovered yesterday, I can't talk and type at the same time.
I can help, but I would like an assist if possible.
Many hands make light work. All right. If anyone has any opens, please note them in the document. I wanted to give everybody a quick update. For those of you that may or may not be aware, this working group decided to adopt the OpenSSF's mobilization plan stream 5, which is the open source security incident response team, the OSS CERT. We kicked off weekly SIG meetings 2 weeks past, and this week was our second meeting. So if anyone is interested to join those efforts, those will be Tuesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We got our very own Git repo. It cost hundreds of dollars to do. And I'll get us set up with a mailing list for that group. If anyone's interested, they can subscribe to that. And we'll also have a Slack channel. And please bear with me because I'm a one-man show here. I will slowly start to update the Git repo so that it actually is more useful and informative. But eventually all of our working group notes, all of the SIG notes will go there, and any artifacts the SIG produces will be there. Any questions about the OSS cert? All right. Well, then, let us continue our ongoing editorial efforts. I will throw a document at you in the Zoom chat. This is a document we've been collaborating on for a little bit. This is our current project. This is a CVD guide for how finders can better interact with open source projects and maintainers. So we'll start off. First off, does anyone have any thoughts about the document before we actually dive in and start to do some edits? Vicki.
I did a quick edit pass last week, recently. I don't know, time no longer has any meaning. And I think it's really shaping up nicely. And I'm really pleased at the direction it's going. So thanks everyone for all their work so far, and I look forward to seeing more of it.
I agree. I went through and approved a bunch of changes, like periods and formatting and caps and that type of stuff. So we should be looking at a mostly clean document, and we just have some outstanding comments or requests. And how about we start cruising down through the document? If I could point your attention to what is an open source maintainer section, it's at the bottom of page 2 and on to page 3. Do we feel we need to do any further definition for a security researcher about kind of who an open source maintainer is and what their jam, what they're all about? And Crystal had made the suggestion, I believe, that the LF has a style guide. So one task we'll have in the future is to look at that style guide and apply it towards this document before we publish it, so that it harmonizes with the rest of the foundation artifacts. All right, if there's no questions about what a maintainer is, if you want to go down to what are open source maintainers' motivations, if anyone has any feedback on additional motivations, I provided a link to the foundation's 2020 contributor survey, which is an excellent report that talked a lot about different reasons why people contribute to open source. But if we had any more we wanted to highlight for researchers, that would be very useful to put here. Any comments there?
Quick suggestion, would it be possible
Please.
to?
It's open source, anything's possible.
Well, no, I've been doing this too long. Honey, I'm not going to buy that line. No, would it be possible to give us a short list of the things you would like us to review, and then we take a couple minutes all to read it? Because I suspect what's happening is everyone's like, yeah, that's fine, but none of us have read it in a week or more.
Nobody's read the document? Yes. So I would, if that would be does everyone agree that that would be a more productive use of our time, since some people didn't do their homework? All right. How about we zoom in? We have a couple areas where we don't have a ton of material yet. If I can point you to disclosure options on page 8. I would like to think about, are there more than 3 disclosure options here? And I would like to potentially get someone to put some definition potentially beneath those to kind of define, like, what does no disclosure mean? Oh yeah, you can sell 0 days. That would make me sad. Don't do that, please. So let's take a couple minutes and think about, are there any other, they'll actually put that up, that is something you can do. You can go to a bounty platform or whatever. Oh, and a bounty platform might be potentially, to maybe phrase that a little better. Please.
Maybe we
Miss
can...
Jennifer, hello.
Hi, good to see you again. I was thinking maybe we can carve out some of the nuance in these things, like selling a vuln to a bounty platform and selling it to Zerodium or different things. So we can carve out that and kind of talk about, the implications of these different choices. We can also maybe carve out a bit around full disclosure, because full, but I think there's flavors of that. There's releasing a very high level advisory versus releasing a detailed advisory with a working proof of concept exploit code. So maybe carving some nuance there, because I think that even under all of these categories, even though different categories are better choices than others, in my opinion, even within a category, you might be able to make a safer for the internet choice versus a less safe for the internet choice.
I agree. I would like to get some more words to each of these, and potentially be biased towards some suggestions, some urging for our readership. And then I'd also like to link to the ISO standards and the CERT CC first CVD guide.
I have a question on contributing. Do you want us to just edit directly in the document if we want to add stuff, or how are you running this one? Sorry if I've missed that.
I don't care.
Okay.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay.
If you're going to change a section, I would prefer we suggest. But if we're adding something new, we're all looking at it right now, we can kind of adjudicate that right here in the call. So feel free to edit. But yeah, if you're going to modify somebody's existing work, please suggest for now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Jennifer and you, Grub, that it would be great to make strong recommendations on the directions, and also tell people why certain things aren't necessarily good for the greater good. Yes, you can sell these things, for instance, but here's why it's a really bad idea, aside from being just ethically questionable. So that would be really lovely to add that in here. And as my editor likes to remind me, you're the author. It's okay to have opinions. And I think in particular for this document, it's advisable for us to have opinions.
Yeah, and remember, this document is representing open source maintainers and projects. So we're trying to help educate those researchers to work better with us in those communities. So we were trying to help those two communities get together. So that's kind of the perspective with which we should view this. So if there's something that if we can err on the side of benefiting the maintainer or making suggestions that benefit the open source project, I would prefer to recommend those types of things. But it is a viable option that a researcher can ignore that and go sell it as an option. Any additional thoughts here on this section? We probably should have some verbiage around proofs of concept.
Yeah, whoever's typing, I love the formatting and looks great.
Yeah, the anonymous duck is doing a great job.
Yeah.
Is anyone brave enough to maybe start putting some words around proofs of concept and sharing those things?
can do that if you want.
Thank you, Jennifer. I feel weird with this thing here.
Yeah, sorry, I just took the artistic liberty and put that all on the table.
That's excellent. No, I think that's good.
Are you anonymous duck? You're doing such a good job.
Thank you.
So I'm going to, while we're thinking here, I'm going to put some food for thought out for the group. At the recent open source summit in Austin, Texas, there was some conversation around vulnerability identifiers. And there are a lot of options available, with CVE being the leading candidate, the most well-known, but there are many other numbering schemes. So while we're thinking about the disclosure options, another thing we can also think about is, do we wish to potentially change the language to talk about vulnerability identifier, of which CVE is an example of, or do we want to stick with a hard line for CVE?
I think it makes sense to also have some alternatives, given OSV is one of the projects that OpenSSF actually backs.
Yes.
It's probably good for us to comment on norms though. Like, I agree that it's a good idea to share the broader like ecosystem so people are aware, but like, at least in my opinion, and please feel free to disagree with me, everyone on this call on this, but it feels like CV is pretty much a norm. And if someone's looking for, you know, a guide into how things are done, I think it's fair for us to say like, you know, this is what's typically happening, so that they have that as like a prototype.
At least in North America, for commercial enterprises, CVE is the standard. I can't speak to EMEA or APAC or other parts of the world, but that is the standard here in this side of the globe. But there are alternatives, and there's a very strong vocal community within open source that is expressing an interest in alternatives as well.
There are also, you know, the commercial scanners usually have their like internal identifier, like for Black Duck BDSA, Black Duck Security Advisory, etc., which they have like it could be that you have like an internal ID for that scanner and the CV ID, but sometimes you have only like the internal ID, and it's sometimes like for configurations, you know, configuration. I wouldn't say vulnerabilities, but yeah, there is some artistic freedom to the vendors, and also there's something that is there's a discussion around cloud providers and how they manage their vulnerabilities, because they don't really publish CVEs. They just you know fix whatever needs fixing, and there's no record of that anywhere basically. So that's also something that you might want to mention somehow.
That's actually a really good point, Yoda. We should mention that somewhere about kind of the nuances of interacting with hyperscalers and cloud providers, that they will react a little differently.
Including apparently asking you to sign NDAs that you can't see. I don't know whether anyone saw Jonathan's comments about that in the Hash General channel.
Yeah, we definitely should research that and verify that before we would put anything, commit to a formal document. But that is, again, I think we're trying to help coach finders to have a very frictionless experience. But we should note that there will be, when you're approaching, there will be differences when you approach a commercial vendor versus a free and open source maintainer versus a cloud service provider. Potentially the experience and process might be different.
So one potential approach could be as well mentioning vulnerability identifiers early in the paper, but then mentioning that we're going to be using CVE and the process around it as the solid example.
It's a good idea, Josh. I like that. Let me see. While you all look at the table and start to fill that out, let me look up higher in the document to see where I might be able to sneak that in. Spelling. And I guess I would ask the larger group, do we wish to advocate for the predominant use of CVE? Is that our kind of consensus opinion that we want to express through this document? I don't want to force my opinion on everyone.
Anybody here knows how to use and request OSVs?
That is all, and actually they're part of this working group. I don't know that they show up very often, but that is actually the OSV folks are part of this working group. So it's something we should mention. And it is, they've done a lot of work with the next iteration of CVE to kind of harmonize that work.
Before we finalize that document to see if they have like good recommendations or something that we can put in there. Maybe it's as simple as going on a website and clicking something. I just don't think any of us have done it, sadly.
Yeah, I created a section just below what is CVD, talking about a word about vulnerability identifiers. So I'll just kind of have a stub there and I'll put some notes, and I have a note here to reach out to the CV OSV folks for about their practices. All right, back to our table. Oh, look, it's filling up nicely. So are we good to go with the style of the table here? We'll remove the bullets once we're all happy. Are we good with the transition to a table instead of bullets? Okay, awesome. And I love the fact that a lot of this information is codified in an international standard like ISO. I hate the fact that that is not publicly available for no fee, which just will help exclude a lot of people being able to look at that good work.
On that note, I mean, and sorry if this is a tangent, is there, in your view, or in anyone on this call's view, a need to develop an open standard on something like this?
We have the existing CERT and FIRST document around multi-party disclosure. Mirrors a lot of the work that was in ISO, and actually I was one of the contributors to that, and one of the authors of it actually helped revise, is in the process of revising the ISO standard. So there should be a lot of consistency or harmonization between the two, but they will be slightly different.
Okay.
So if we refer to the first CERT document, that would be that is publicly available. freely available to anybody.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I hadn't seen the ISO one. Thank you.
Yeah, you got to pay for it.
Could someone drop a link to that in the chat?
I have a note that we'll put it in the document. I don't have it handy. And I got this goofy thing that limits my typing. All right. Any other thoughts about the disclosure options before I pick a new section for us to look at? All right, let us move next to when all else fails on page 9. Give you a few minutes to read those 2 short paragraphs. I think we probably need to augment this a little more. And for those of you first taking a close look at the document, we agreed a while back we'll be removing the graphics for now, and we will potentially save those for like a conference presentation when we unveil our work. But for the formal document, we'll be removing the artwork. Unless there's an interesting diagram we want to develop, that would be useful.
Yeah, so not sure if this is covered in other sections. So going overboard with reaching out to maintainers via these kind of broadcast methods for minor issues, I wouldn't really go this way. So just evaluate just balance it if it's worth annoying a lot of people or something like that.
I think that's an excellent point, Marcus, and welcome. It's nice to hear from you again.
Yeah, sorry to have to skip.
Oh, no, we miss you, man. You have good contributions. So I think that's a very good point. I'm going to put a comment here just so we don't forget it, and we'll find an appropriate place to put that in the document. But I think that's good feedback to provide, that you can become a nuisance and kind of work against your goals of getting things fixed quickly by making a lot of hubbub.
Yeah, otherwise it looks good. Also, perhaps just not 5 methods at once. Yeah, so one thing after the other, because yeah, otherwise it gets also annoying. But otherwise it looks good.
Thank you. Good.
I may be noodling on the words a little bit too much,
Hmm?
but would we say, as a group, would we say it should rarely be a first course of action, or is the guidance more like almost never consider this as a first course of action?
I completely agree with that, Kayla. We
Okay.
should be, this is an area we should be opinionated on. We don't want 0 days dropped, so let's modify that.
Okay.
Is changing it to a not kind of meet that goal?
Yeah, I think so. I do. I mean, or even we could, if, and starting maybe the sentence as the, like basically starting with, as the disclosure also informs attackers that a vulnerability exists, and basically end it with like this is kind of why you shouldn't take that as a first step versus, and I'm happy to put it in suggestion mode as well to put that in there.
If you could do that, just because it's a pain in the rear for me to type right now.
Yeah. I'll just put it in suggestion mode. So feel free, folks,
Groovy.
to add in there.
Groovy. Josh, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had a quick question for the alternative vulnerability identifiers.
Mhm.
Is that specifically the format of the vulnerability identifiers or databases that provide them?
As it lays on the page, it is both. And we probably should do a better job of refining, because the GSD is a database.
Correct. And the GSD uses OSV format, for example.
Correct. So we should probably, we definitely need to expand that section with some context and verbiage. And if anyone is interested in providing that additional context or words under alternative vulnerability identifiers and formats, please do so. And if anyone is if somebody could find somebody could find me a link to the CNA documentation about how the CNAs of last resort. If anyone could find a link to that documentation, that would be useful, and put some words around that. Because you can always go to a national cert, or even working up the chain to organizations like MITRE. Or work with the distros or other providers. Gary, thank you. Right. Any additional thoughts about when all else fails? Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm reading this, and just with these edits that were just made as the public full disclosure and ending with this should not be considered as a first course of action, that seems to be a little redundant too, but it remains a last resort in the sentence prior.
It does.
And then drop, I'm new to this, so forgive me.
We all are.
My proofreading days, would it be dropping a 0 day versus an 0 day?
I believe is the correct. And just so everyone knows, we did, David Wheeler talked with the folks at the LF. We do have technical editors that when we're done, we'll be able to go through this and kind of help proof and catch things like a versus an. Maybe I can get them to apply the style guide.
Yeah, but that one, it just seemed a little redundant to me.
Yeah, I agree. If
Yeah, I'm a fan of all, like, just because if we're gonna like emphasizing the last resort type stuff and removing anything redundant, like totally, as long as that's the story, and we're not, there's no even suggestion of a first course of action. So we could almost take out that whole sentence. honestly.
The first?
Yeah, the kind of my suggestion, or the as public, like my edits to that second sentence. I mean, I think it's important to include the why that's in there, which is, you know, it's informing attackers that there's a vulnerability without a fix. I think that's important. So maybe even meshing the two sentences, because yeah, definitely don't want any redundancy.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good catch. If anyone has any interesting ways to combine the sentences, that would be much appreciated.
I'm very impressed by all you people who can write and compose with voices and conversations happening. Impressed and moderately envious.
So as we start to wrap up that piece, if you scroll beneath Fry, you will see ensuring everyone understands what and how things will be disclosed on page 10. And that's an excellent header with no content. So I think we talked about this as part of the maintainer guide. So we might be able to borrow some words from the maintainer guide, but we definitely need to put some content in here to explain this.
I'm glad this is going to go to a technical editor, because I think I'm creating run-on sentences as I'm trying to edit some of this stuff.
It's always hard editing a document with 20 people watching. But yeah, the intention is, and this won't be the last time we do this. We'll have, it looks like we've got several sections that need some augmenting to go. So we will procedurally continue to do exercises like this, and then we'll do homework for everybody. Please read the document in totality, and we'll catch run-ons and typos and stuff, and then we'll send it over to the editor for publication, which our desired publication is Black Hat, although we don't have a presentation slot that bounds that. So if we're late, we can still, as long as we're targeting August, I think that's acceptable.
Is there a Black Hat acceptance?
I have the Black Hat refusal of the talk.
Oh yeah, well, these things happen.
I got the hard knack.
I wonder if there's any open DEF CON villages where it could be a fit. That tends to be the latest open Vegas CSP.
Possibly. We also have, thinking within the foundation, we will be having a town hall in probably September now, it looks like. So if we should be done by then, if parts of the group wanted to come present like for 5 minutes or so during that town hall, we could present this artifact, and that's another way that we could advertise it. And that'll go out through Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube. It'll be a video. So that'll be a way to kind of get the word out. So does anyone have any thoughts about how we can ensure that everything has been effectively communicated and everyone understands what's going to go on with this disclosure?
So disclosure aside, just in general, how do people here on the call ensure that what they have communicated was received on the other end? So just generally speaking. And then how, because I find people are really bad at that, myself included in many cases. But and then from that, is there anything special for this specific use case of vulnerability disclosure that we need to add or otherwise modify? Yeah, Madison, I'm big +1 on that. You tell people and then you tell them again and tell them again, then you tell them you told them, and then you tell them you told them you told them. Yeah.
Josh, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, do we need to distinguish at all between, for example, vulnerability disclosure with vendors versus project maintainers?
We definitely should speak about it because there will be differences possibly. You'll get a hopefully more disciplined experience with a vendor, that they'll have a process and tools, whereas the project may not have those capabilities or access to those resources. So maybe it'll go a little different. We should definitely mention that.
I think that's a big part of the NDA conversation as well. As
And
far
I-
as if you were much more likely to need to be aware of the possible presence of an NDA when working with a commercial vendor versus open source project, you almost shouldn't. So I definitely think that's a component that could be included.
Agreed.
It kind of is there. It kind of is there already. Like
Well, we should be explicit. We should
Yeah.
explicitly state that.
Maybe
Jennifer.
communicating expectations in advance, I think, can be important. So we talk about, for example, having a disclosure policy of one's own. And, you know, some people have 7 days, some people have 90 days, and everything in between. Like one thing that I try to do with our researchers is ensure that when we talk to whoever, that in that first contact, we share our disclosure policy, but like setting an expectation in the communications. For your awareness, we'll be releasing this advisory in 30 days, something like that, because it's probably not good enough that you email them and buried somewhere on your website is a policy that has a number of days. Like I think being explicit can be really helpful there.
And we talked about having a personal vulnerability disclosure policy for the researcher, that they should have some expectations of how they would like things handled. That is up on page 7.
Yeah,
And it looks like the group trailed off at the end and stopped writing.
Do we have any lawyers on the call that
I play one on
that
TV.
can apply? Yeah.
If we need to, the foundation has counsel that we can talk to and get advice from, because will be an artifact of the foundation. So is there something in particular we wanted to bring up to that group, Crystal?
I'm just wondering, like, I guess questioning whether or not in many cases that would even apply. Like, it depends on if there's like a terms of service in the place that it's being, the report is being disclosed or the issue is being disclosed. So it might, like, including it might be implying that there would be some validity to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it would depend on, where that's said and how that's said.
I'll have to ask how we get that advice or review. I know how to do it at my company. I get to do it every hour.
Oh. I don't know, what's everybody's thoughts on just that section in general, like, or the advice of having your own terms. I mean, I think that could be framed as just communicating like what you expect as a finder versus like having terms and conditions as a finder. I think that's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Yeah. It's a good point that you're raising, Crystal, because like it introduces a lot of complexity. Like if a vendor or a project has a set of terms and then you as a researcher like write up your own terms, and maybe the terms are like, you'll buy me a hot air balloon if I like drop 0 days on you. Like to what extent is that enforceable or meaningful? And I wonder, like, should we be, and this is truly an open question, not a rhetorical one, should we be recommending people have their own disclosure policy? Like as a company, right? Like, so I'm here at NCC Group, we have our policy because we do a lot of it and we're trying to keep consistency across researchers. But like as an individual, does that make sense? And like, is that, I don't know. I wonder if on one hand, it's valuable to clearly state your expectations and to keep them consistent across time and across entities. But on the flip side, I wonder if we are introducing something that could become like a bureaucratic hurdle or like a norm that is not productive. And I'm not actually totally unsure as to which direction it is.
This particular piece, I suspect, was submitted by Jonathan, who's an independent researcher. And I from that perspective, I appreciate that you need to have some expectations and goals. We probably should expand that, maybe alter it to have, as a policy is very formalized. Maybe we change that to, and we talk about what are your goals up above, but maybe we should state, the researcher, you should come into this relationship with, and state what your expectations are. I'm presenting at a conference, or I'm publishing this, getting my PhD, which I have to defend it on this date. So I think the researcher definitely needs to come in and state kind of what the constraints of this disclosure are from their perspective. Maybe policy isn't the best word, and it's probably definitely not going to be a formal kind of terms and conditions. Like, I don't know that they're going to have a lawyer draw anything up. But it's, we also want to make sure we're considering that stakeholder group. Madison. I'm sorry, Jennifer rebut, or Crystal rebut, and then Madison.
Yeah, I was just going to say I completely agree. And I think you stated it, and Jennifer stated it really eloquently, that calling it a policy is, I guess, where it seemed a bit like out of place there. And it kind of reminded me of like, my aunt saying that, like, posting something on like a screenshot on Facebook and saying like, I own all my personal material. You agreed to terms and conditions. Like that doesn't apply. Like there's no, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think there's any legal standing there. And so I didn't want to set that expectation with researchers and then for them to run into like a problem because of it and end up in like a weird sticky legal situation potentially. So I love the idea of framing it as setting our expectations, but not calling it a policy. Okay. And those examples you gave were wonderful, Grub.
Thank you. Madison.
Just to add on to that, because I was working with Jonathan when you wrote that. Policy is definitely a strong word. What he really meant here is setting clear expectations specifically around deadlines from the start. So he, as somebody who is disclosing a number of vulnerabilities and is maybe a bit more mature in their vulnerability disclosure process than somebody who is very new to this, has his own predefined set, what he calls a policy himself, that he shares in each disclosure. So maybe a good way throughout this document that we can think about this too is that there's a varying range of maturity, I think, expected from researchers. If this is the only vulnerability they have found and are likely to find, and maybe they're never going to do this again, there really is no use to them setting up something quite as formal as a policy, which I agree is maybe not the right word for what Jonathan, I think, meant by this. But for those that are regularly doing this, that could be useful. So maybe throughout this, the way that I've been thinking of this document is we share all of the options available to a researcher, and from that they will choose what matches their level of maturity, basically, like laying out all of the options that are available for them. So this is maybe one of them, albeit maybe overkill in some circumstances, so we can maybe rephrase it appropriately.
Before I move on to Jennifer, thinking about other work I've done within standards and whatnot, would we be served by potentially tiering these as levels of maturity or providing some type of scale, saying a very mature, experienced researcher might actually have a legal document, but somebody starting off isn't. Do we want to either in this document or as some side piece talk about how this isn't necessarily, you're not going to do everything. It'll be kind of potentially layers or levels. Is that how we would like to go?
If I can jump in here. So there was
You
something
may.
I wanted to share from before because Crystal said something that was kind of inspiring my brain, but also I want to comment on this if that's okay.
Please, both.
On this one, I don't know, like, feel free to disagree, but I feel like we should be opinionated here and that presenting all of these options as equal and that presenting them as levels of maturity, like I see the perspective and value in that, but I also wonder if we may lead people astray in an unintended way. Like, I think there's certain expectations that we should reasonably set amongst researchers and that we can reasonably have of researchers, even when they're not doing this at a large scale or, haven't done it professionally for a long time or whatever. Expectation setting, like, yeah, that's something you're more likely to see in an experienced researcher. But if we're setting a guide of what we want people to do, I think saying that like setting expectations up front is something that you should aim to do. So I wonder if like we might want to revisit the debate of presenting all of these options as equal, because I don't think necessarily that they are, and that we do have an opportunity here to really shape the direction of the way people behave in this space towards something that is, better for the projects, better for the researcher and things like that. And I guess relatedly, but not quite, the original reason I had raised my hand was around the policy thing, because I also just want to, mention that there might be unintended consequences of having a policy as a researcher. Like, I don't necessarily know that we'd want to frame it as a more mature researcher will have a policy, because then if you're doing this and this catches on, I mean, then more and more people adopt this. I don't think that the balance of power in vulnerability disclosure is necessarily advantageous for the researcher in a lot of cases, right? And the idea that you would create a legal or a legally contentious document that then could be, battled out between you and a big vendor with a big legal team. I mean, that strikes me, first of all, as potentially dangerous for the researcher. And second of all, maybe antithetical to what we're trying to achieve, which is working together to make the internet safer as much as we can, instead of like inviting a bunch of lawyers. So I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense to ever involve lawyers, but I guess what I'm saying is moving this into the grounds of like inspecting legal agreements and opening that up as like more of a normal thing as a part of this process. I don't know if that serves our ultimate goal of making stuff more secure. So that's just kind of some food for thought. And I think that we need to consider that as we set recommendations within the guide.
Agreed. Let me think about how to capture that feedback, Jennifer. Give me a little bit. Vicky, you had a comment or statement, question.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jennifer. I think she's touched upon a lot of really important subjects with this. Perhaps we can use examples from other places, such as, what we really want to do is tell researchers how to communicate best and most easily with open source maintainers, right? Well, why don't we set up essentially a template type thing? Here's the sorts of things that an open source maintainer will expect to see, or they would like to see. Here's how you can make their life more easy. And I take this idea from, frankly, open source. You go to an issue, you can have a template there for an issue. Here's the things we as a project would like you to add. Or if you're going to add a pip, right? You want to change something in Python, they have a template for that. So set up the guardrails. What are the guardrails that we want them to operate within, so everyone has life just a lot easier, frankly, and that's what we're looking for. To help, as Jennifer points out multiple times, where our end goal is to help secure the internet, right? And how can we make that easier for everyone to do? And everyone hates a blank page. So don't give them one. Give them a template of some sort.
That was actually a point, Vicky, we had mentioned earlier in the document. Wouldn't it be great if we had an appendix of definitions? So that's one missing area. And the second missing area is templates, which we actually did on the original maintainer guide. We have a stock security MD file and a stock intake template. So I think we absolutely need to do that here and provide researchers. Here is a more effective way you can report vulnerability by having these 4 data elements in your report or whatever. So I agree with you there. We need to do templates, and I put both a stub for the appendix and templates at the bottom of the document. We could start fobbing things there and figure out how we break it up once we get into Git. Jennifer.
I feel like I'm talking a lot today, so sorry, everyone.
That's okay.
But in listening to Vicky's excellent points, the words that came to my mind were secure defaults. Like if we have templates and we have well-defined workflows that err on the side of making things more secure, like maybe that's the lens through which we can view this guide is let's give information so people get an idea of the broader context in which they're operating, but let's point recommendations in the direction of the things people do that are most likely to lead to these vulnerabilities being remediated quickly. And I think to Crystal's point, that's about giving templates for collaboration, and what Vicky had said around like actually handing out a fill in the blanks seems like a great path.
Agreed. And potentially stylistically, we may want to change the document that when we have an opinion, we will label it recommendation. And then when there are other options, we could put alternatives. Potentially we could stylistically have a little box. Like if you remember the old For Dummies books, you had the little guy pop up saying, here's a tip, pro tip. So we could actually stylistically have something. This is our recommended, this is the good practice we endorse, and here are some alternative choices. All right, we are nearing the top of the hour. I thought this was an excellent conversation today. I appreciate everyone's thoughts. Your homework, as always, is please take a look at this document. And in light of this conversation today, I hope some of you will suggest some wording, like how we can rephrase policies and think about how we might want to be more directive in our recommendations throughout the document. So please take a peek at that, and we will meet again in 2 weeks. I'll see everyone interested in the CERT next week, and everyone have a great week. Thank you for your help today. Cheers.
Bye, all. Thanks.
Bye, thanks everyone.